The worst part of dying wasn't the flatline. It was waking up an hour later on a sticky motel carpet gagging on the smell of spilled bourbon and cheap alpha pheromones. My head pounded with someone else's memories. An R&D genius, an Omega. A husband about to be framed for infidelity, stripped of his patents and thrown into the gutter by the man he loved. I pulled my heavy, unfamiliar limbs off the floor. I didn't love anyone, and I certainly wasn't going down like this. The carpet smelled like stale tobacco and artificial pine. That was the first thing that registered. Not the fact that I was alive after a massive coronary in a hospital bed a world away, but the rough synthetic fibers scraping against my cheek. I inhaled and immediately choked. The air was thick, heavy. It tasted like burnt sugar and rotting cedar, a cloying, oppressive scent that triggered a visceral spike of terror in my chest. My heart hammered a frantic, irregular rhythm against my ribs. It wasn't my terror. It was a biological response hardwired into the nervous system of the body I now occupied. Omega. The word surfaced through the fog in my brain, accompanied by a sudden sharp ache at the base of my neck. I pushed myself up onto my hands and knees. The muscles in my arms trembled. A wave of nausea hit me so intense I had to squeeze my eyes shut and swallow down the copper-tasting bile rising in my throat. I didn't groan. I didn't dramatically curse the heavens. I just breathed through my nose, counting to 10, waiting for the room to stop spinning. When I opened my eyes, the blinking red light of a cheap digital alarm clock on the nightstand glared at me. 11:42 p.m. Next to the clock was a half-empty bottle of cheap whiskey and 2 glasses. Beyond that, sprawled on the sagging mattress, was a man. An alpha. He was unconscious, stripped down to his boxers, snoring wetly. The oppressive cedar scent was rolling off his skin in waves. Memories that weren't mine crashed over me, messy and disorganized. Ahern Wallace, 26 years old, lead biochemical engineer at Martinez Pharmaceuticals, bonded Omega to the CEO Draco Martinez, and currently the victim of a spectacularly cliché setup. The original Ahern had been lured here under the pretense of meeting a whistleblower. Instead, he'd been drugged with a low-grade suppressant inhibitor and locked in a room with a hired alpha in a pre-rut. In exactly 18 minutes, according to the fractured memories bleeding into my consciousness, Draco would burst through that flimsy hollow core door with a private investigator and a camera crew. They would find his genius Omega husband in a compromising position. It would be the perfect justification to nullify the marriage contract, seize Ahern's multi-billion-dollar patent under the morality clause, and pave the way for Draco to marry his true affection, a weeping, soft-spoken Omega named Caleb Graves. I sat back on my heels. I looked at my hands. They were pale thin, lacking the calluses I'd built over 40 years of my past life. They were trembling violently from the residual drugs in my bloodstream. I felt a sudden, profound exhaustion. I had spent decades clawing my way up corporate ladders, fighting hostile takeovers, surviving lung cancer, only to die of a heart attack at 50. I just wanted to rest. And now some cosmic joke had shoved me into a 26-year-old body in the middle of a bad melodrama. "Fucking unbelievable!" I rasped. My voice sounded higher than I was used to. Softer. It grated on my nerves. I didn't have time to process the existential dread. The drug in my veins was making my skin flush. The original Ahern would have panicked, succumbed to the pheromones, and curled into a weeping ball of submission. I dragged myself to my feet. The room tilted, but I locked my knees. 18 minutes. I stumbled to the bathroom. The fluorescent light flickered, humming with a high-pitched buzz that drilled into my temples. I turned on the cold tap, cupped the freezing water in my hands, and splashed it over my face. The shock grounded me. I looked in the mirror. Messy ash-blonde hair, wide, terrified blue eyes, flushed cheeks. I looked like a victim. I hated it. I stripped off the oversized sweater that reeked of the Alpha's cedar scent and tossed it into the bathtub. I rummaged through the small toiletry bag on the counter. The original Ahern, bless his anxious little heart, carried a heavy-duty scent blocker spray. I doused myself in it until the chemical smell of unscented alcohol overpowered the cedar in my nose. I walked back into the bedroom. The Alpha snorted and shifted. I needed to leave, but running away meant looking guilty. If I wasn't here, Draco would spin the narrative that I fled the scene. I needed to control the narrative. I spotted the Alpha's discarded jeans on the floor. I rifled through the pockets. Keys, a cheap disposable lighter, a wallet. I opened the wallet. The ID read Liam Carter. Several crisp $100 bills were stuffed inside. Caleb's payoff money. I took out my own phone. My hands were still shaking, so I gripped the device with both hands, using my thumbs to navigate. I found Caleb's number in the contacts. The original Ahern had saved it with a little flower emoji. Gross. I drafted a message from my phone to Caleb's. It's done. He's completely out. Bring the boss. Then I deleted the message, but not before taking a screenshot of the draft and sending it to a secure cloud server I quickly set up on a dummy email. Evidence was everything. I looked at Liam on the bed. If Draco walked in and found this guy alone, he'd just assume I slipped away. I needed Draco to find exactly what he came looking for, just not with me. I pulled on my coat, grabbed the half-empty whiskey bottle, and walked over to the bed. I didn't feel brave. I felt annoyed. I carefully poured a splash of the amber liquid over Liam's chest, letting it soak into the sheets. Then I took the Alpha's phone from the nightstand. No passcode. Stupid. I opened his messaging app. There was an unsaved number at the top. The messages were explicit instructions on how to drug me. I didn't delete them. I forwarded the entire thread to Draco's private, unlisted email address, the one the original Ahern knew, but was strictly forbidden to use. I attached a single sentence. Check your dog's leash, Draco. He's biting the wrong people. I wiped down the doorknob, the faucet, and the nightstand with my sleeve. I took my phone, my wallet, and walked out the door. The hallway smelled faintly of stale bleach and old carpet. I pulled the door shut until the lock clicked. 5 minutes. I didn't leave the motel. That would be a waste of a perfectly good front row seat. My body was aching. The suppressant inhibitor was warring with a heavy dose of scent blockers I'd sprayed on myself, creating a hollow, throbbing pain in my joints. I leaned heavily against the wall of the stairwell at the end of the hall, shadows hiding me from the main corridor. The concrete was freezing against my back, seeping through my coat. It felt grounding. Real. I checked my watch. 11:58 p.m. The heavy thud of the motel's exterior door echoed up the stairs. Footsteps. Fast, purposeful, and heavy. The squeak of rubber soles on cheap linoleum. I adjusted my position, peering through the small gap between the stairwell door and the frame. 3 men came into view. 2 of them were burly, holding expensive DSLR cameras, the kind that captured high-resolution misery for the morning tabloids. The third man was Draco Martinez. Seeing him in person was different from the memories. Draco was a prime alpha. Tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in an impeccably tailored charcoal suit that looked absurdly out of place in a 2-star motel hallway. Even from 30 feet away, his presence felt like a drop in barometric pressure. The air grew heavy. A faint, sharp scent of ozone and cold steel drifted down the hall, slipping through the crack in the door. My body reacted instantly. My knees buckled slightly, a biological instinct to submit to bare my neck to a superior predator. I bit the inside of my cheek until I tasted blood, using the sharp pain to override the pathetic instinct. I hated this body. I hated this world's rules. Draco didn't look like a heartbroken husband. His jaw was set, his expression rigidly neutral. He looked like a CEO executing a hostile merger. He stopped in front of room 214. He didn't hesitate. He didn't take a deep, trembling breath. He just nodded at the larger of the two cameramen. The man lifted a heavy boot and kicked the hollow door squarely near the handle. The cheap wood splintered instantly, the door flying open with a loud crack. Flashes of brilliant white light immediately strobe-lit the hallway. Click, click, click. Ahern. "I can't believe you—" Draco's deep, resonant voice boomed into the room, laced with a perfectly manufactured tone of betrayal. Then he stopped. The flashes stopped. From my vantage point, I couldn't see inside the room, but I didn't need to. I heard the confused, groggy groan of Liam Carter. "What the hell?" one of the cameramen muttered. "Where is he?" Draco's voice dropped an octave. The faux betrayal was gone, replaced by a cold, dangerous edge. "Mr. Martinez, there's just some guy in here. He's alone." "I have eyes, Miller," Draco snapped. The heavy scent of ozone flared sharp and angry. I watched Draco step fully into the room. I could picture him scanning the space, the empty glass, the spilled whiskey. He was looking for signs of a struggle, signs of a hasty exit. What he would find was a perfectly ordinary, pathetic motel room and an alpha reeking of cheap booze. A moment later, Draco stepped back out into the hallway. He pulled his phone from his inner pocket, staring at the screen. I knew what he was looking at. He had just received my email. I watched his thumb swipe across the screen. I saw the exact moment he read the forwarded text between his precious Caleb and the hired alpha. Draco's posture went rigid. His hand gripped the phone so tightly I thought the glass would shatter. The silence in the hallway was absolute, save for the hum of the neon sign outside. He didn't yell. He didn't throw the phone. He just turned to the cameramen. "Get out." "But sir, the pictures." "I said get out." His voice was dangerously quiet. The alpha command in it was absolute. The two men scrambled down the hall, nearly tripping over themselves to escape. They passed my stairwell without even looking. Draco stood alone in front of the shattered door. He raised a hand, rubbing the bridge of his nose. He looked tired. Good. I didn't stay to watch him leave. The drug in my system was reaching a critical point, making my skin feel like it was wrapped in fiberglass. I slipped silently down the stairs, out the fire exit, and into the freezing night air. The cold wind whipped against my face, smelling of car exhaust and wet asphalt. I hailed a passing taxi, slipping into the back seat. The faux leather seat was cold and stiff. "Where to?" the driver asked, glancing at my disheveled state in the rearview mirror. I gave him the address of the Martinez estate in the upscale northern suburbs. I rested my head against the cold window glass, watching the blurry city lights streak by. My chest ached. My old life was gone. My corporate empire, my solitary, quiet penthouse all erased. I was now a pawn on someone else's chessboard. I closed my eyes, a dry, humorless smile touching my lips. They made a mistake. They thought they were playing with a naive, love-struck Omega. They didn't know they had just invited a shark into their aquarium. The Martinez estate was a monument to clinical modernism. Glass steel and polished concrete. It felt less like a home and more like an art gallery, where no one was allowed to touch the exhibits. I walked through the front door at 2 a.m. The security system recognized my biometric scan, the heavy door unlocking with a soft, expensive snick. The house was dead silent. I bypassed the grand staircase leading to the master suite I supposedly shared with Draco. Instead, I headed straight for the kitchen. My body was crashing hard. The adrenaline was gone, leaving behind a hollow, aching exhaustion and a ravenous hunger. The kitchen was spotless, smelling faintly of citrus cleaner. I opened the massive industrial refrigerator. It was stocked with organic produce and prepackaged meals. I grabbed half a loaf of sourdough, some butter, and a carton of eggs. I moved mechanically. The physical actions, cracking the eggs, whisking them, the sizzle of butter in the hot pan, helped tether my mind to this new reality. The smell of cooking food was the first real comforting thing I'd experienced since waking up. I made a pot of black coffee, strong enough to strip paint. By 3:30 a.m., I was sitting at the massive marble island, a plate of scrambled eggs in front of me, a ceramic mug of scalding coffee in my hands. The ambient lights were dimmed to a cool blue. I was halfway through my coffee when I heard the hum of tires on the driveway outside, the heavy thud of a car door closing. I didn't tense. I took another sip of coffee. The dark roast burned the roof of my mouth, sharp and grounding. The front door opened. Footsteps echoed in the foyer, heavy and deliberate. They paused at the base of the stairs, then changed direction, heading toward the kitchen. Draco walked in. He had taken off his suit jacket, his tie loosened, the top button of his crisp white shirt undone. He looked disheveled in a way that belonged on a magazine cover. The sharp scent of ozone entered the room with him, but it was muted, now tightly controlled. He stopped at the edge of the kitchen, his dark eyes locking onto me. He didn't look surprised to see me here, though a flicker of calculation crossed his face. He was assessing the situation. He expected to find me sobbing, begging for forgiveness, or demanding explanations. I took another bite of my eggs. I chewed, slowly swallowed, and picked up my mug. "Good morning," I said. My voice was calm, utterly flat. No tremor, no biological submission. Draco's jaw tightened. He walked slowly toward the island, stopping opposite me. "Where were you?" "Having breakfast," I replied, gesturing to my plate. "Want some? I make a decent scramble." He didn't appreciate the sarcasm. He placed his hands flat on the marble counter, leaning in slightly. "You weren't at the motel." "No, I corrected him mildly. "I was just out of the room by the time you decided to kick the door in. Dramatic entrance, by the way. Very cinematic." Draco's eyes narrowed. "You sent me that email." "I did." I set my mug down. The ceramic clinked loudly against the marble. "I thought you should know your side piece is running sloppy operations. Hiring an alpha off the street, leaving a paper trail of text messages. If Caleb is going to frame me for infidelity to trigger the morality clause in our prenup, he really needs to try harder." Draco flinched. It was microscopic, a tiny tightening around the eyes, but I caught it. He hadn't expected me to lay it all out so plainly. The original Ahern wouldn't have even understood the financial implications of the setup, let alone confronted him about it. Ahern. Draco started, his voice dropping into that smooth, placating tone alphas use to calm hysterical omegas. You're stressed. The inhibitor. Don't! I cut him off. I didn't raise my voice, but the absolute lack of emotion in my tone made him stop. Don't patronize me, Draco. We both know what tonight was. You want the patent for the neurosuppressant. You want me out of the picture without having to pay the dissolution fee. And you want to move Caleb into the master bedroom. It's a very neat, efficient little business plan. I reached into the inner pocket of my coat, which was draped over the stool next to me. I pulled out a thick manila envelope and slid it across the smooth marble. It stopped perfectly an inch from Draco's hands. What is this? He asked, his voice guarded. Divorce papers, I said. And a drafted transfer of rights. Draco frowned, looking down at the envelope but not touching it. You're signing over the patent. God, no. I let out a dry, breathy laugh. I'm signing over exclusive licensing rights to Martinez Pharmaceuticals for a period of 10 years. In exchange, I get 50% of the gross profits at clean divorce where you cite irreconcilable differences and an immediate payout of $20 million. Draco stared at me as if I had suddenly started speaking Mandarin. You're out of your mind. I'm entirely lucid. I picked up my coffee again. You sign that you get to keep the drug that's going to save your company's fourth quarter margins. You get your freedom. You get your weeping little Omega. Everyone wins. And if I don't, Draco challenged, his alpha presence flaring, slightly testing the waters. I didn't flinch. I just looked at him over the rim of my mug. If you don't, I take the forwarded messages between Caleb and the alpha to the board of directors. I leak the metadata to the press. I drag you and your lover into a protracted, highly public legal battle over attempted assault and corporate espionage. The stock of Martinez Pharmaceuticals tanks. Your shareholders revolt. And Caleb ends up in a very unflattering orange jumpsuit. Silence settled over the kitchen. Heavy, suffocating silence. Draco studied my face. He was looking for the bluff, looking for the heartbreak, the tears of a betrayed spouse. He found absolutely nothing. Just a tired man who wanted his $20 million and a good night's sleep. You've changed, Draco said softly, almost to himself. I grew up, I replied, taking a final sip of my coffee. Now, are you going to sign, or do I need to call my publicist? Draco didn't sign the papers, not immediately. He left them on the marble island, his jaw working as if chewing on glass before turning on his heel and walking out of the kitchen. The heavy front door slammed shut a minute later. I didn't care. The seed was planted. He was a businessman above all else, and I had just handed him a spreadsheet where his absolute ruin was mapped out in the negative columns. He would sign. I left the dishes in the sink and dragged my exhausted body upstairs. I bypassed the cavernous master suite entirely. The original Ahern's memories guided me to a small secondary guest room at the end of the hall. It was sparse, sterile. It smelled like nothing, which was exactly what I needed. I locked the door, stripped down to my boxers, and collapsed onto the stiff mattress. Sleep hit me like a physical blow. When I woke, the digital clock on the bedside table read 9:15 a.m. My body felt like it had been run through an industrial press. The residual effects of the inhibitor drug lingered in my joints as a dull, throbbing ache. My mouth tasted like copper and old pennies. I swung my legs over the edge of the bed and sat there for a long moment, pressing the heels of my hands into my eyes. I missed my old body. I missed the arthritis in my left knee and the familiar, manageable cadence of a heart that had beaten for half a century. This young hypersensitive omega biology was a nightmare. Every scent was turned up to a deafening volume. Every ambient noise grated against my eardrums. I forced myself up, showered in freezing water, to shock my nervous system into compliance, and raided a closet that wasn't mine. The original Ahern favored soft, oversized cashmere sweaters and pastel-colored garments designed to make him look approachable. Harmless, submissive. I pushed past them, finding a pair of charcoal slacks and a stiff black button-down shirt buried in the back. The collar was too tight, chafing against the sensitive scent gland at the base of my neck. Good. The discomfort would keep me sharp. An hour later, I was stepping off the private executive elevator onto the top floor of Martinez Pharmaceuticals. The corporate headquarters was a monument to Draco's ego. Floor-to-ceiling glass, brushed steel, and an army of employees moving with panicked urgency. The air was heavily filtered, but I could still detect the layered sense of anxiety, cheap cologne and stale coffee. "Mr. Wallace." The receptionist at the front desk blinked, her voice faltering. "We didn't expect you in today." "I work here, Sarah," I said smoothly, not breaking my stride as I headed toward the R&D wing. "But Mr. Martinez's schedule." I ignored her. I swiped my key card at the heavy frosted glass doors of the laboratory sector. The light flashed green, and the magnetic lock disengaged with a heavy thud. Before I could push the door open, a hand clamped down on my wrist. "Ahern." I didn't flinch, but my heart executed a painful, erratic stutter step. My biology recognized the newcomer before my brain did. The cloying, overwhelmingly sweet scent of overripe peaches and synthetic vanilla hit the back of my throat. It was thick enough to choke on. I turned my head. Caleb Graves. He was exactly as the memories painted him. Petite, doe-eyed, with soft brown curls and a pout perfectly calibrated to trigger an alpha's protective instincts. He was wearing a ridiculously expensive white blazer, clutching a tablet to his chest like a shield. He looked at me with wide manufactured concern. "Ahern, what are you doing here?" Caleb asked, his voice a soft, breathy whisper. "Draco said you were unwell after last night. He said you had a breakdown at some motel." The sheer audacity of it almost made me laugh. He was probing, checking to see if the hired alpha had successfully broken me, trying to gauge how much I remembered through the haze of the inhibitor. I looked down at the hand resting on my wrist. Caleb's fingers were manicured soft. "Let go of me," I said. My voice wasn't loud, but the absolute void of warmth in it made Caleb blink. He didn't let go immediately. Instead, he leaned in closer, his saccharine scent spiking. A subtle biological dominant play. Omega against omega. "Ahern, you really should go home. People are talking. The rumors. I'm just looking out for you." I reached up with my free hand and gripped his wrist. I didn't squeeze hard, but I pressed my thumb directly against the bundle of nerves running along the bone. Caleb gasped, his grip instantly slackening. I dropped his arm as if it were a dirty rag. "Let's get something straight. Caleb," I said, leaning in just a fraction. I kept my voice pitched low, forcing him to strain to hear me over the hum of the HVAC system. "I saw your text messages. I know about the $4,000 you wired Liam Carter. I know exactly what you tried to do." Caleb's face drained of color. The doe-eyed innocence vanished, replaced by a sharp, panicked calculation. His scent soured instantly, the overripe peach turning rancid. "I don't know what you're talking about," he whispered, his voice trembling, this time for real. "You're sloppy," I continued, ignoring his denial. "If you're going to play corporate espionage, don't use your personal cell phone. And definitely don't hire an alpha who leaves his screen unlocked while he's passed out drunk." I stepped back, smoothing the cuff of my shirt. "Draco has the divorce papers. He's going to sign them, and you're going to get exactly what you want. The husband, the house, the status. But if you ever approach me again, if you ever try to pull a stunt like last night, I won't just ruin your reputation." I held his gaze, letting 40 years of my past life's boardroom ruthlessness bleed into my eyes. "I will bury you so deep in litigation, you won't be able to afford the perfume you use to cover up your cheap desperation. Do we understand each other?" Caleb took a step back, his chest heaving. He opened his mouth to speak, but no sound came out. "Good chat," I said. I turned, pushed open the heavy glass doors, and stepped into the sterile sanctuary of the laboratory, leaving him suffocating in his own panic in the hallway. The R&D floor smelled beautifully, perfectly toxic. A mix of isopropyl alcohol ozone from the servers and the sharp tang of iodine. It was the only place in the building where biology took a back seat to chemistry. The original Ahern had built this division from the ground up. He was a prodigy, a savant, who understood neuropathways better than he understood human interaction. His team respected his brain, but pitied his spine. They watched him get steamrolled by Draco in board meetings, watched him cede credit for his own discoveries because he was too anxious to stand at a podium. Not anymore. I walked past rows of white benches and humming centrifuges. A few technicians looked up, their eyes widening in surprise, but I didn't stop to make small talk. I headed straight for the glass-walled director's office at the far end of the floor. I locked the door behind me and dropped into the ergonomic chair. I fired up the dual-monitor workstation. The biometric scanner read my thumbprint, and the encrypted drives unlocked. I spent the next 2 hours completely immersed in the original Ahern's data. The neurosuppressant formula the patent Draco was ready to steal was brilliant. It was designed to stabilize the severe neurological tremors alphas experienced during chemical rut suppression. It was a billion-dollar drug, but looking closely at the molecular modeling on the screen, I noticed a flaw. Ahern had been too cautious. He had buffered the primary synthetic compound with a heavy lipid base to mitigate nausea, but it drastically reduced the absorption rate. It would take 4 hours to take effect. If an alpha was crashing, 4 hours was a death sentence. My fingers flew across the keyboard. I stripped the lipid buffer. I cross-referenced a dozen alternative delivery mechanisms, falling back on the decades of chemical engineering experience from my past life. I merged my old knowledge with Ahern's brilliant foundation. If I replaced the lipid base with a modified saline peptide string, the absorption rate would drop from 4 hours to 12 minutes. It wasn't just a billion-dollar drug anymore. It was a monopoly. You're rewriting the beta sequence. The voice was a low resonant baritone that sent a physical vibration through the soles of my shoes. I didn't jump. I calmly saved the simulation, locked the screen, and spun my chair around. Leaning against the doorframe of my office, having bypassed the lock, I distinctly remembered engaging with Sebastian Porter. He was the lead clinical trials director, and an alpha Unlike Draco's suffocating, dominant ozone scent, Sebastian smelled like cold rain on hot asphalt and sharp black pepper. It was a scent that didn't demand submission. It demanded attention. He was tall, dressed in a faded black Henley and dark jeans under a pristine white lab coat. His dark hair was messy, and his eyes, a striking pale gray, were fixed intensely on my monitors. The door was locked. "Sebastian," I said, keeping my voice level, "I have master overrides for the lab. Safety protocols." He replied, pushing off the door frame and walking into the room. He didn't ask for permission to sit. He dropped into the chair across from my desk, crossing one long leg over the other. "Why are you stripping the lipid buffer? The nausea in the trial rats was catastrophic without it. Rats don't have the same metabolic breakdown in their liver enzymes as a human alpha in a rut crash." I countered instantly, the words flowing with practiced ease. "The lipid buffer is a pacifier. It treats the symptom, not the cause. If we use a peptide string, we bypass the hepatic first pass entirely. Direct to the bloodstream. 12-minute absorption." Sebastian went perfectly still. His gray eyes dragged away from the locked screens and locked onto my face. He looked at me as if he were seeing a complete stranger wearing a Hearn Wallace's skin. He was. 12 minutes. Sebastian repeated, his voice dropping a fraction. The black pepper scent in the room sharpened, telegraphing his intellectual arousal. "That's aggressive." "It's efficient," I corrected. I leaned back in my chair, interlacing my fingers and resting them on my stomach. "And it's the version of the formula I am patenting under my own LLC this afternoon." Sebastian's eyebrows rose. A slow, dangerous smile pulled at the corner of his mouth. "Your own LLC Martinez owns your work, Ahern. It's in your contract." "My marriage contract nullifies standard employee IP clauses." I lied smoothly. Well, half-lied. It was a legal gray area I planned to exploit until it bled. "And since my marriage is dissolving as of 3 a.m. this morning, my intellectual property leaves with me. Draco gets a licensing agreement. I get the patent." Sebastian let out a low whistle, leaning forward and resting his elbows on his knees. "Did you hit your head, Ahern? Because the guy I knew yesterday would have hyperventilated at the thought of using the wrong font on a memo, let alone blackmailing Draco Martinez." "I had a near-death experience," I said dryly. "It clarifies the priorities." Sebastian studied me. He wasn't radiating dominance, but the sheer physical weight of his presence was exhausting to fight off. My omega biology wanted to avert its gaze, wanted to bare its neck to keep the peace. My jaw ached from clenching my teeth to keep my head level. "You look awful," Sebastian noted, his gaze tracking the dark circles under my eyes and the unnatural flush of my skin from the lingering inhibitors. "I feel awful, which is why I need you to do something for me." "I'm listening." "I need you to freeze the clinical trials immediately. Lock down the physical samples. Wipe the localized servers on floors 4 and 5. I pulled a flash drive from my pocket and set it on the desk. "The new peptide sequence is on this. Only you and I have it. If Draco tries to seize the old formula, let him. It's obsolete anyway." Sebastian stared at the flash drive. He didn't reach for it. "You're asking me to commit corporate sabotage against my employer. I'm asking you to protect a drug that will save millions of lives from a CEO who only cares about his stock price," I countered. "You run the trial, Sebastian. You know I'm right." Silence stretched between us, thick and heavy with unsaid calculations. The cold rain scent intensified, warring with the sterile smell of the lab. Slowly, Sebastian reached out. His large calloused fingers closed over the small metal drive. He slipped it into his pocket and stood up. "I'll lock down the servers." Sebastian said, his voice quiet. He walked to the door, pausing with his hand on the handle. He looked back over his shoulder. "I don't know what happened to you last night, Ahern, but I think I like this version better." "Get in line," I muttered, turning back to my monitors. The crash from the inhibitor drugs finally hit me at 4 p.m. It didn't arrive with a dramatic collapse. It started as a subtle vibration in my jaw, a cold sweat dampening the collar of my stiff shirt, and a sudden acute sensitivity to the fluorescent lights overhead. By 4:15, my vision was swimming with gray static every time I stood up. My omega biology, deprived of its natural hormonal rhythms and poisoned by Caleb's cheap street drugs, was demanding restitution. I was hunched over the keyboard in my locked office, blindly typing lines of simulation code when the desk phone chirped. The shrill electronic tone felt like an ice pick driven directly into my left ear. I hit the speaker button. "Wallace." "Ahern." Draco's voice filled the small office, heavily compressed through the cheap speaker, but still radiating authority. "My office. Now." The line went dead. I stared at the blinking red light on the console. My stomach rolled. The original Ahern would have immediately checked his reflection, smoothed his hair, and practically sprinted to the executive wing, desperate to appease the irritation in his alpha's voice. I took 2 ibuprofen from the drawer, dry swallowed them, and waited 5 full minutes before standing up. The walk to the executive suite was a grueling exercise in compartmentalization. My knees felt like they were made of damp sand. The thick plush carpet of the top floor swallowed the sound of my footsteps, amplifying the heavy erratic thud of my own heartbeat in my ears. The heavy mahogany doors to Draco's office were already open. I walked in. The room was freezing. The air conditioning was cranked high, but it did nothing to suppress the overwhelming, suffocating scent of ozone and burning copper. Draco was furious. He was standing behind his massive desk, his hands planted flat on the glass surface. He didn't look like a polished CEO anymore. The mask was slipping. "Close the door," he ordered. I pulled the heavy doors shut. The latch clicked loudly. I didn't walk forward. I stayed near the exit, leaning my shoulder against the wall to take the weight off my trembling legs. "You froze the clinical trials," Draco said. It wasn't a question. His voice was dangerously low, a physical vibration that rattled the pens on his desk. I just had the head of regulatory compliance call me in a panic, because floors 4 and 5 are on complete biological lockdown, and Sebastian Porter is citing your direct authorization. "That's right," I said. My throat was dry. "The lipid buffer in the current formula is inefficient. I'm restructuring the delivery sequence." Draco let out a harsh barking laugh. He walked around the desk, his expensive shoes clicking sharply against the hardwood floor. He was closing the distance. "You don't get to restructure anything, Ahern. You don't have the authority to halt a $30 million trial phase because you had a temper tantrum." He stopped 3 feet in front of me. The ozone scent hit me like a physical wall. It was a deliberate, concentrated release of alpha pheromones, a biological weapon designed to trigger submission in an omega. My body betrayed me instantly. My lungs seized. My chin tipped down involuntarily, a hardwired instinct to expose the scent gland at my neck. A pathetic whimpering sound gathered at the back of my throat. I hated it. I hated this fragile, subservient shell. I dug my fingernails into the palms of my hands until the skin broke. The sharp, blinding sting of pain cut through the pheromone fog. I forced my head up. My neck muscles screamed in protest, twitching with the effort. But I met his dark, furious eyes. I have every authority. I rasped my voice, shaking slightly, betraying the physical toll, but my tone was absolute ice. The base formula is dangerous, Draco. In a high-stress rut crash, the liver won't process the lipids fast enough. You'll have alphas seizing in the streets. You'll have a body count. I don't care about the hypothetical margins of error, Draco yelled, stepping closer, his imposing frame casting a shadow over me. I care about the FDA deadline next month. Unlock the servers. No. Draco froze. The single word hung in the freezing air between us. He looked at me as if I had just grown a second head. The original Ahern had never not once in their 3-year marriage told him no. "Excuse me," Draco whispered. "You heard me." I pushed myself off the wall, standing as straight as my aching joints would allow. The old formula is dead. The new peptide sequence is currently being patented under my personal LLC. The paperwork was filed at 1 p.m. Draco's face went pale, then flushed a dark, violent red. "You stole company property. I took my brain and put it in a different legal entity." I corrected calmly, though sweat was trickling down my spine. "Read your own marriage contract, Draco. Section 4, Paragraph 2. Any intellectual property developed by the Omega spouse outside of directly funded company hours remains the sole property of the Omega until legally transferred. I developed the peptide sequence at 3 a.m. in your kitchen on my own time. It's mine." He stared at me. I could see the gears turning behind his eyes. The ruthless calculation of a corporate shark realizing he had just been outmaneuvered on a technicality he himself had drafted to avoid paying me alimony. "You think you can play this game?" Draco's voice dropped, turning venomous. He reached out, his large hand gripping my jaw. His fingers were bruising, digging into the soft flesh. "You're a fragile, unstable mess, Ahern. You're shaking right now. You can't survive a boardroom war." "I don't have to," I said, ignoring the pain in my jaw. I stared blankly into his eyes. "I just have to survive you. And frankly, you're not that complicated." I brought my hand up and gripped his wrist. I didn't try to overpower him. I couldn't. I just dug my thumb into the pulse point, pressing hard. "Sign the divorce papers, Draco," I said softly. "Sign the licensing agreement. You get the new improved drug. You save the company. Or you can stand here trying to intimidate me while your stock tanks and your board replaces you by Friday." I shoved his hand away. He let go, stepping back as if burned, his chest heaving. I didn't wait for a response. I turned, opened the heavy mahogany doors, and walked out into the silent plush hallway. The moment the door clicked shut behind me, my knees buckled. I caught myself against the wall, gasping for air. The taste of blood thickened my mouth from where I had bitten my own cheek. It was ugly. It was brutal. But I had won the room. By Friday evening, the silence from the executive wing was deafening. Draco hadn't signed the papers, but he hadn't fired me either. It was a standoff. I was in the lab at 7 p.m., watching the slow, mesmerizing drip of the centrifuge. Sebastian was leaning against the adjacent counter, drinking black coffee out of a paper cup. We hadn't spoken for 20 minutes. It was a comfortable, productive silence. Sebastian's scent, cold rain, and black pepper was a stark contrast to Draco's suffocating ozone. It didn't trigger my Omega panic responses. In fact, it had an irritatingly stabilizing effect on my erratic heart rate. My biology recognized home as a safe harbor, which annoyed me to no end. I didn't need a harbor. I needed leverage. "The synthesis is holding," Sebastian finally said, breaking the silence. He set the cup down and checked the monitor. 98% purity on the peptide bind. "You're a terrifying genius, Ahern." "I'm just fixing a mistake," I muttered, rubbing my temple. The headache was a permanent fixture now. My phone buzzed on the metal counter. A calendar notification. 8 p.m. Capital Investment Dinner. Le Bernardin. I stared at the screen. I had completely forgotten. The original Ahern's calendar was synced to Draco's. This was the quarterly dinner with Harrison Vance Waite, no Harrison Gould, the primary venture capitalist backing the new drug trials. A second notification popped up. A text from Draco. "Gould is expecting the unified front. Be at the restaurant at 8. Wear the blue suit. Do not make a scene." I let out a dry, rattling breath. Draco was trying to force my hand publicly. If I didn't show up, Gould would pull funding blaming domestic instability. If I did show up, Draco would use the public setting to play the controlling alpha, forcing me into the subservient husband role to project corporate stability. "Problems?" Sebastian asked, catching my expression. "Just a desperate man trying to hold on to his leash," I said, grabbing my coat from the back of the chair. "I have a dinner to ruin." Sebastian straightened up, his pale gray eyes narrowing slightly. "Gould, yes. Draco will eat you alive in public, Ahern. He knows how to play the crowd. He'll frame you as hysterical. The board will eat it up." "Let him try," I said, pushing my arms into the sleeves of my coat. Sebastian walked over, closing the distance between us. He was a full head taller than me. The black pepper scent spiked sharp and protective. "You shouldn't go alone. The inhibitor crash is still messing with your neurochemistry. You're pale as a sheet." "I'm fine. You're shaking." He reached out his fingers, brushing my wrist. The contact sent a jarring shock of warmth up my arm. My Omega biology immediately tried to lean into the touch. I snatched my hand back, glaring at him. "Don't do that," I snapped. Sebastian held his hands up in a gesture of surrender, but his eyes were hard. "I'm coming with you." "You weren't invited." "I'm the lead clinical trials director," Sebastian countered smoothly. "Gould is investing in my trials. It's perfectly reasonable for me to be there to discuss the restructuring of the timeline." I weighed the options. Sebastian was dangerous. He was too perceptive, and my physical reaction to him was a liability. But he was also a massive, imposing alpha who carried enough corporate weight to block Draco's physical intimidation tactics. "Fine," I bit out. "But you follow my lead. Do not speak unless spoken to." Sebastian smirked. "Yes, boss." We arrived at the restaurant at 8:15. The air inside was thick with the smell of seared Wagyu truffles and the overwhelming colliding perfumes of the city's elite. It made my stomach turn. The maitre d' led us to a private alcove in the back. Draco was already there, sitting across from Harrison Gould, an older alpha with silver hair and a sharp, predatory smile. And sitting right next to Draco, looking like a porcelain doll in a tailored beige sweater, was Caleb Graves. I stopped at the edge of the alcove. The sheer gall of it was staggering. Draco had brought his side piece to a multi-million-dollar investor dinner, likely planning to introduce him as his new assistant, while phasing me out of the narrative. Draco looked up. His eyes locked onto me, a triumphant smirk forming on his lips. Then his gaze shifted slightly to the left, registering Sebastian's massive presence lingering just behind my shoulder. The smirk vanished. Draco's jaw clenched, a muscle ticking frantically in his cheek. "Ahern," Draco said, his voice tightly controlled. He stood up, playing the perfect host. "You're late, and you brought Dr. Porter." Sebastian had some vital updates regarding the trial data, I said smoothly, stepping into the alcove. I ignored the empty chair Draco had clearly designated for me, the one tucked submissively into the corner. Instead, I pulled out the chair directly across from Caleb and sat down. Sebastian took the seat next to me, his broad shoulders forming a physical barrier between me and the rest of the room. Harrison Gould looked amused, his sharp eyes darting between the four of us. "Dr. Porter, a pleasant surprise. Draco didn't mention you'd be joining." "It was a last-minute decision, Mr. Gould." Sebastian said, his voice a low, soothing rumble that instantly diffused the tense energy in the alcove. "The science doesn't wait for dinner reservations." I turned my attention to Caleb. He was staring at me, his eyes wide, his saccharine peach scent spiking with nervous anxiety. He looked out of place, clutching a crystal water glass with white-knuckled fingers. "Caleb," I said, my voice dripping with cold, polite venom. "I didn't realize executive assistants were cleared for Tier 1 investor meetings. Did you bring the presentation printouts, or are you just here to pour the water?" Caleb flushed crimson. He opened his mouth, but Draco cut in, his alpha ozone flaring aggressively. "Caleb is here to take notes, Ahern. Keep your tone in check." "Notes," I repeated flatly. I looked at Gould. "Harrison, I apologize for the crowded table, but since we are all here, I believe we should discuss the updated licensing terms for the neurosuppressant." Gould raised an eyebrow, swirling his expensive red wine. "Licensing terms, Draco informed me the patent was entirely in-house. A company asset." Draco was misinformed, I said, maintaining absolute eye contact with the billionaire. I didn't look at my husband. "As of 1 p.m. today, the revised highly accelerated peptide formula is the sole intellectual property of Apex Synthetics, my personal LLC." The silence in the alcove was absolute. Even the clatter of silverware from the main dining room seemed to fade. "Ahern, shut your mouth," Draco hissed, dropping the facade entirely. He leaned across the table, his eyes murderous. I didn't flinch. I reached into my jacket, pulled out the folded legal document, a copy of the LLC registration and the initial patent filing, and slid it across the white tablecloth toward Gould. "Martinez Pharmaceuticals currently has a temporary licensing offer on the table." I continued, speaking directly to Gould, ignoring Draco's raging presence. "But if their executive board cannot finalize the terms by Monday morning, I will be taking the formula to open market. I thought you should know Harrison before you sign over your second round of funding. Make sure you know exactly who owns the drug you're buying." Gould picked up the papers. He adjusted his reading glasses, his eyes scanning the legal jargon. A slow, terrifying smile spread across his face. He looked up, bypassing Draco entirely, and looked right at me. "Well, Mr. Wallace," Gould chuckled, folding the papers and slipping them into his breast pocket. "It seems the lab rat has grown teeth." I picked up my water glass, taking a slow sip to wet my dry throat. "I always had teeth, Harrison. I just got tired of hiding them." The rest of the dinner was a masterclass in quiet, suffocating agony. Draco didn't scream. He couldn't. Harrison Gould was a kingmaker in the pharmaceutical world, and throwing an alpha temper tantrum in front of him was a quick way to tank a stock price before the market even opened on Monday. Instead, Draco sat rigidly in his chair, radiating a localized storm of ozone and burning copper that made the back of my throat taste like battery acid. Caleb was openly weeping by the time the main courses were cleared. It wasn't the delicate, sympathetic crying of a wounded Omega. It was the messy, panicked realization of a parasite watching its host die. His cloying peach scent turned rancid, mixing with the heavy truffle oil of the untouched risotto in front of him. I ate my sea bass. I didn't have much of an appetite, but my body needed the calories to fight the lingering tremors from the inhibitor crash. Every time my hand shook holding the heavy silver fork, I felt Sebastian shift beside me. He didn't hover. He didn't emit protective pheromones. He just anchored his knee against mine, under the table, a solid grounding point of contact, in a room spinning with toxic biology. Gould excused himself before dessert, citing an early flight. The moment his tailored suit disappeared around the corner of the alcove, the illusion of civility shattered. Draco stood up so fast his heavy oak chair scraped violently against the floorboards. "You are a dead man, Ahern. Legally, financially. I will tie you up in injunctions for the next decade." I carefully placed my linen napkin on the table. "You can't enjoin what you don't own. The patent application is airtight. I used open-source lab equipment for the baseline modeling. I have the digital timestamps." I pushed my chair back and stood up. My knees protested, a dull, throbbing ache radiating up my thighs. "Have your legal team read the proposal. Monday at 9. I turned to leave. I didn't get 2 steps before Draco's hand shot out his fingers, locking around my bicep like a vice. "You're coming home," Draco snarled. The command was laced with pure, unfiltered alpha dominance. The air pressure in the alcove dropped. My lungs seized. The biological instinct to collapse to bare my throat hit me with the force of a freight train. My vision tunneled, the edges turning a fuzzy gray. I hated him. I hated him for having this button he could press inside my nervous system. Before I could force my jaw to work, a large hand clamped down over Draco's wrist. "Sebastian." He didn't yell. He didn't even flare his scent. The quiet violence in his grip was purely physical. I heard the sickening creak of bone and cartilage grinding together. Draco gasped his grip on my arm, instantly slackening. "Let him go," Sebastian said softly. His pale gray eyes were flat, completely devoid of emotion. It was the look of a predator assessing a very easy kill. "He's not going anywhere with you." Draco ripped his arm away, cradling his wrist against his chest. He looked between the two of us, his chest heaving, the realization dawning in his dark eyes. He wasn't just losing his company, he was losing his property, and a prime alpha was standing in his way. "You're crossing a line. Porter." Draco spat, though he took a half-step back. "He's my bonded Omega." "Not for much longer," I rasped, finally finding my voice. I rubbed my aching bicep. "Keep your hands off me, Draco. Next time I won't let Sebastian intervene. I'll just press charges for battery." I walked out of the restaurant. The cold night air hit my face like a damp towel, shocking my system out of the pheromone haze. The streetlights blurred, haloed by the moisture in my eyes. I felt nauseous, hollow, and utterly exhausted. A heavy dark wool coat draped over my shoulders, trapping the residual heat. It smelled like cold rain and black pepper. "My car's at the corner," Sebastian said, his voice a low rumble beside my ear. He didn't touch me. He just offered the proximity, the shield of his presence against the chaotic street. "I can take a cab," I muttered, pulling the coat tighter around myself despite the protest. "You're currently a high-value corporate asset," Sebastian replied dryly, guiding me toward a sleek black sedan parked in the loading zone. "Consider me your private security. Get in the car, Ahern." The leather interior of his car was cold, but the heater kicked in immediately, blowing dry, warm air over my frozen hands. I leaned my head against the glass window, watching the city lights streak by. The adrenaline was draining out of me, leaving nothing but the bruised reality of what I had just done. "You handled him," Sebastian said quietly, his eyes fixed on the road. "Gould is going to force the board to accept your terms. They need the drug." "I know. Draco will sign the divorce papers to save face." "I know." Silence filled the car, punctuated only by the rhythmic thud of the tires over pavement seams. "Why did you back me up?" I asked, turning my head to look at his profile. The streetlights cast sharp shadows across his jawline. "You just made an enemy out of a billionaire CEO. You jeopardized your career." Sebastian laughed. It was a short, breathy sound. "My career is tied to a drug that doesn't work without your peptide sequence. You're the only one in that building with an actual brain." He paused, his grip tightening slightly on the steering wheel. "And honestly, watching you gut him at that table was the most impressive thing I've seen in 5 years. I closed my eyes. The cynic in me, the 40-year-old corporate shark, wanted to dissect his motives to find the hidden leverage he was trying to build. But the Omega biology, battered and bruised, just felt a profound, terrifying relief. "Take me to a hotel," I said quietly. "I'm not going back to the estate." "I know a place," Sebastian replied. He didn't ask questions. He just drove. Monday morning arrived with the sterile smell of bleached paper and stale boardroom coffee. The Martinez Pharmaceuticals executive conference room was entirely glass, giving the entire R&D floor a front-row seat to the slaughter. I sat at the far end of the long mahogany table, wearing a crisp charcoal suit that actually fit me, hiding the lingering bruises on my arm. Sebastian stood directly behind my chair, a silent, immovable monolith. Draco sat opposite me. He looked like he had aged 5 years over the weekend. The tailored suit hung loosely on his frame. The suffocating ozone scent was entirely absent, buried under layers of chemical scent blockers. He was trying to project sterile professionalism, but his eyes were bloodshot and dead. Sitting between us were 3 corporate lawyers and Harrison Gould. "The terms are straightforward," Gould said, tapping a thick stack of papers against the table to align them. He slid the first document toward Draco. "Martinez Pharmaceuticals agrees to a 10-year exclusive licensing agreement for the Apex Synthetics peptide formula. 50% gross profit share to Apex. Furthermore, Mr. Martinez, you will sign the dissolution of marriage citing irreconcilable differences with the agreed-upon $20 million severance package." Draco stared at the papers. His hands were flat on the table. He didn't move. "If you refuse," Gould continued, his voice devoid of any warmth, "I pull my Series B funding at 10 a.m. The board has already agreed to terminate your position as CEO if that happens. You have no moves left, Draco. Sign the paper." I watched Draco's throat work as he swallowed. He looked up, his dark eyes locking onto mine. He was searching for the Ahern he married, the soft, anxious genius who would apologize for breathing too loudly. He was looking for a crack, a sliver of hesitation or guilt. I gave him nothing. I just tilted my head, waiting. Slowly his hand reached out. He picked up the heavy gold fountain pen. The scratch of the nib against the thick parchment sounded like a bone saw in the quiet room. He signed the licensing agreement. Then he pulled the divorce decree toward him. He hesitated for a fraction of a second before scrawling his name across the bottom line. He pushed the papers back to the center of the table and stood up. He didn't say a word. He didn't look at Gould or his lawyers. He just turned and walked out of the glass room, his footsteps heavy and defeated. I looked down at the signatures. The ink was still wet, catching the harsh fluorescent light. It was over. "A pleasure doing business with you, Mr. Wallace," Gould said, standing up and extending a hand. "Likewise, Harrison," I replied, shaking it firmly. My grip didn't falter. 30 minutes later, I was standing by the massive floor-to-ceiling windows of my newly assigned private lab, a concession written into the licensing contract. I was looking out over the sprawling city skyline. The sky was an overcast slate gray. It matched my mood. I had won. I had $20 million complete control over a revolutionary medical patent and my freedom. But I was still in this body. I still had the erratic heartbeat, the sensitive scent glands, the biological vulnerability of an Omega. The victory didn't erase the reality of my transmigration. It just made it tolerable. The door to the lab clicked open. I recognized the scent before I heard the footsteps. Cold rain and black pepper. "They're clearing out his office," Sebastian said, walking up to stand beside me. He didn't crowd me, leaving exactly a foot of space between our shoulders. "The board is appointing an interim CEO this afternoon." "What about Caleb?" I asked, keeping my eyes on the city traffic far below. "Security escorted him out of the building an hour ago," Sebastian replied. "He tried to cause a scene, claimed he was Draco's bonded partner. They boxed up his desk." "Fitting," I murmured. "So," Sebastian leaned against the glass, turning his head to look at me. "You have your empire. You have your money. What are you going to do now, Hearn?" I looked at him. The gray eyes were sharp, probing, but utterly devoid of the toxic dominance that had defined my previous interactions in this world. He was an alpha, yes, but he was a scientist first. He respected the mind before the biology. I felt a small, genuine smile touch the corner of my mouth. The first real smile since waking up on that sticky motel carpet. "I'm going to finish the clinical trials," I said, turning away from the window and walking toward the pristine, empty workstation in the center of the room. "And then, Dr. Porter, we are going to build a better drug, without the interference of a fragile ego." Sebastian chuckled, a low, warm sound that settled comfortably in my chest. He pushed off the glass and followed me. "Yes, boss." I didn't conquer the world. I just carved out a sanctuary in it. And for the first time since my heart stopped in my past life, I finally felt like I could breathe. If you enjoyed this raw, twisted journey of betrayal and corporate warfare, don't let the story end here. Hit that like button to support the channel and share this video with fellow Omegaverse fans who crave a mastermind protagonist instead of a weeping victim. Subscribe and ring the notification bell so you never miss an upload. We've got plenty more cynical, gripping BL stories coming your way. Your engagement fuels the algorithm and helps us bring these dark, complex characters to life. Drop a comment below. What was your favorite moment of Ahern's revenge? See you in the next one.